Good afternoon. Let's try it one more time. Good afternoon. It's great to see so many of you here, familiar faces, new faces. My name is Gretchen Spreitzer. I'm a member of the Management and Organizations faculty here at the Ross School of Business and a core faculty member with the Center for Positive Organizations. We're really glad you're here. I'd like to give a special welcome to those of you on the live stream. And I'd also like to give an extra special welcome to anybody who's here for Positive Links for the first time. If you're here for the first time, can you raise your hand? All right. Wow. Bob, you really bring in the new folks. Good work. Good work. So at the Center for Positive Organizations, we're really about building the science behind what makes for positive organizations. And then we try to spread that science out into the world through creating students who are change agents for creating thriving, positive organizations. Let me ask how many people here today are students at Ross or beyond, other parts of the university. We're really glad you're here. You guys are the future of positive organizations. And then we also try to spread it out to the world through our organizational outreach, maybe through units here at the University of Michigan, maybe through our consortium members, through our executives and residents. So let me ask how many of you are in work organizations in the world, maybe part of our consortium. All right, great. We're really glad to have you here too. Usually this is the point in the program where we do a high quality connection, but you know Bob, he always likes to mix things up, so we're going to pause on that and we'll come back to that later. I'd like to acknowledge the sponsors of Positive Links. We couldn't do this without you. We're really appreciative to the University of Michigan Organizational Learning Group, the Sanger Leadership Center, the Tauber Institute for Global Operations, the Samuel Zell and Robert H. Lurie Institute for Entrepreneurial Studies, Lisa and David Drews, and Diane and Paul Jones. Paul's with us today. We thank all of you for your support. So with that, I'm now going to turn to introduce Bob Quinn. Bob is my mentor for many, many years. He was my advisor for my doctoral student, and I like to also think of him as a great friend and colleague. Many of you probably know Bob, but because it's the first week of our new semester, I thought it would be good for you to all take a pop quiz about Bob. And so if you have a piece of paper in front of you, I have 6 questions, and I'd like to see how well you do. Bob, you can try to answer these too. All right. So you got a 50% chance on each one, right? True or false? All right. Are you ready? True or false? Bob thought it would be a good idea to start his career by studying bullying in the office. True or false? Did Bob start his career by studying bullying? Question number 2. Bob published the book, The Economics of Higher Purpose, 8 Counterintuitive Steps for Creating a Purpose-Driven Organization, after he retired from Ross. True or false? Was it before or after? Number 3, Bob created a very popular online course. It's called Becoming Who You Really Are, How to Grow Yourself and Your Organization, where you get to spend 10 minutes every day in person with Bob for 100 days. True or false? Question 4. Bob and his wife Delsa have 6 children and 16 grandchildren, including 1 on the way. Does that make 17, or is that true or false? I goofed that one up. All right. Question number 5. Actually, you got a free pass on that one. Question number 5. Bob is celebrating his 50th wedding anniversary to the love of his life next month. True or false? And the last question, you ready? Bob hiked, so I got some help from his son, Ryan Quinn, on this one. Bob hiked from Rhode Island to New York as a teenager because he wanted to see the World Series. True or false? Okay, so let's see how you do. We're going to see if anybody had a perfect score. First one, did Bob think it was a good idea to study bullying at work? True or false? False. He studied romance. How about that? All right. Keep track of your score. Number 2, Bob published the book Economics of Higher Purpose after he retired from Ross. True or false? True. He's more productive than many of us who, are slogging here day after day. All right. Bob's course, where you get to spend 10 minutes a day with him in person for 100 days. True or false? Not in person, unless you call digital, right? He's with you through videos and so forth. So you decide. Yeah, is that in person? All right, you already know the answer. True. He has 6 children, 16 grandchildren. How about celebrating his 50th wedding anniversary? That part is true, but it's actually this month, not next month, right? It's January? Trick question. All right, the last one. Bob hiked from Rhode Island to New York for the World Series. True? Actually, it's false in 2 ways. He wanted to see the World's Fair, and he hitchhiked, not hiked. Who would have guessed, Bob, the hitchhiker? Anyway, did anybody get a perfect score? Bob, did you get a perfect score?
No.
All right, without further ado, Bob, please come up. Let's give him a warm welcome.
I always knew that woman would go someplace in life. Thank you, Gretchen. Today, I'm really pleased to be here and excited about where I hope we go together. And what I'd like to do is start out with a little introduction to the path. I want to spend a few minutes on horses and unicorns and thinking about those 2 entities. I want to talk about a paradoxical shift in how we think, and then about the economics of higher purpose, and finally about inviting people to social excellence. So that's the path. Those are the 4 topics we'll hit. I want to start out with a quote from a book. Marty Seligman is the father of positive psychology, and he recently published a biography. And in this biography, he makes the following statement: I'm no longer a dedicated skeptic. While still loyal to the side that needs defenders, I think skepticism is overrated. Science has its verificationists, the people who work on confirming or disconfirming others' ideas, but science also needs its question posers, those who can ask the right question at the right time and then point in the general direction of a fruitful answer. We can take this at the literal level, which I'm going to do for a minute, and the place I'd like to go today is to ask a question that might be quite fruitful. A second quote comes from a man named Adam Burgoon, and Adam is a very successful professional who just finished his master's degree at Penn, and Gretchen chaired his capstone paper and said, you need to read this. And so I always follow orders. And this paper was actually quite stimulating. And there's several places where I quote his paper today. And this is one of the things that Adam wrote. He said, POS should give any type of business and any type of founder leader a fighting chance of becoming positively deviant, should they have the inclination. And then he says something else that's quite interesting. He's a huge fan of POS, but he has a criticism. And he said this: in this way, POS has not fully heeded Peterson and Seligman's warning to study horses and not unicorns. Rather, it's memorialized unicorns and the unicorn features and mechanisms. So he's saying POS has spent a lot of time looking at the best in individuals and groups and organizations, and it's memorialized unicorns, and that may be a problem. I want to focus on that today, and this is the central question that I want to lay out, and that is, how can parents, teachers, leaders, and others turn horses into unicorns? Because in the first paragraph, that's the issue that he's raising. It's the exact same issue as a conversation that took place a long time ago when Jerry Porras and Jim Collins wrote Built to Last. which was a book about great companies. It was a very popular book. And one day a person walked up to Collins and said, "Your book is trash." And that was really hard to hear. He said, "What do you mean?" He says, "It's of no value to me. I have an ordinary company. The real question is, how do you turn an ordinary company into a great company? Your book does me no good." And that hit him between the eyes. And he went off, and then he came back, and he wrote a new book called Good to Great, which became one of the best-selling books of all times. I have some quibbles with some of the things in his book. I'm not sure he got everything right. But it's still one of the best-selling books of all time. Why? Because people in the real world are looking to make things better. And this question is a very crucial question. And I have some aspirations for it today. I'm hoping that pushes people in a fruitful direction. And I see two kinds of people in this audience. One, there are some academics who do research. And I'm hoping to do two things to you. One, upset you enough that you have to think creatively and positively about the work you do and perhaps ask new questions by the end of this hour. Secondly, to the academics, most of you teach. You're trying to turn horses into unicorns. I'm hoping that what we covered today alters how you think about how you do that, and that it changes how the interface of teaching and thinking about research happens. For those of you who are not researchers, which is the majority of the people in the room, I'm hoping that you leave here with some new ways to think about what you do every day in managing people, in taking care of your kids, in all the relationships that you operate in. So that's what I hope happens. Paradoxical shift. This is Marty's statement that I read to you already all over again on the left side. I'd like to deconstruct it. To do that, I'd like to create a framework that's actually a very old framework that's been around for a while since we created the earlier versions of it in 1983. Virtue, kindness, gentleness, forgiveness, those are virtues. So are honesty and frankness and boldness. Honesty is a virtue. Trust, compassion, and unity are virtues. So are persistence, diligence, and independence. Patience, reflection, meditation, choice, action, commitment, wisdom, forethought, prudence, spontaneity, risk-taking, improvisation, constancy, compliance, discipline, creativity, vision, adaptability, skepticism, knowledge, conviction, openness, belief, and optimism. The thing that's different about this particular picture is that it's cognitively balanced, and the virtues have opposites. Now, what in the world does that have to do with Marty? I think Marty's making an incredibly complex statement. I no longer am a dedicated skeptic. Marty says, I've changed. While still loyal to the side that needs defenders, I think skepticism's overrated. That's an incredibly complex sentence. Marty says, I defend skepticism. I think we need it. I also think it's overrated. That's a complex thought. So Marty is defending skepticism as a virtue. He says it's overrated, and he has a new view of learning and the role of hope and optimism in that learning process. Marty has evolved. In that same book, he said, I discovered a sense of calling, and describes how it happened in the book. He then exercised courage and said, I want all of psychology to go in a new direction. You get beat up for that in a discipline. And he did. That was a lot of courage. So for the next 20 years, he was immersed in new ideas. The fruit of what he did. These positive psychology studies pouring upon him. And that changed his perspective even further. He's become more cognitively complex. I value skepticism and I value optimism at the same time. And I defend skepticism, even though I think it's overrated. Those are, again, complex thoughts. He's integrating differentiation. And he's co-creating with other people a dynamic whole. That becomes a key phrase later. This is a statement from F. Scott Fitzgerald. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. That's kind of an intriguing notion. Let me take it a step further. This is we did many papers in the 80s. We've written at least 4 books about competing values in which we used that framework in a number of ways. This is the culture version. I'd like to just take you through it because it's going to be important to us in a minute. Almost everybody instantaneously understands hierarchy. In fact, we begin understanding it when we're 2 years old. It's a part of our lives. And in that hierarchy, the criteria of effectiveness is predictability and control. That's why we have hierarchies. The means are structures and processes that are rigorous. 6 sigma, 0 variation, right? Total homogeneity. The knowledge base tends to come from the past. It's our expertise. We have knowledge we've gained, and we put it into the system called hierarchy. The communication's top-down. The leaders and organizer will monitor. The climate's bureaucratic. It serves a need, the need for safety and continuity. I've had lots of people say, I'm taking a job with the government because I never want to be fired. Well, that's a security need, a safety need. Over here in the blue quadrant, we have the market form of organizing. And here it's about impact. Usually for businesses, it's about profit, the bottom line, accomplishing something and getting that return. It's about planning and accountability. The base is in the present and intentional logic. It's all about communication that's objective. The way we find the truth is through debate. The best idea wins. Who you are doesn't matter. It's how you perform that matters. It's just. Highly competitive. The leader's the director, producer. The climate's intense. The employees can satisfy their need to make money, to become famous, to achieve because they're performing so well. Great place for that. Every one of these 4 models has a vulnerability. The vulnerability of the hierarchy is denial. When the world changes, the way we cope with that is through a confirmation bias. And we deny that the world's changing. And as we deny that, we all become disengaged, and that hierarchy begins to disintegrate. In the market, it's objectification. You are an object. What'd you do for me today? And it's amoral and becomes immoral. The end ends up justifying the means, and we get Enron, and we get Wells Fargo, and Volkswagen, and the list goes on, and the system begins to break down. This very morning, I picked up my phone, looked at the headlines. First headline, for 18 years, the officials have been lying to us about the war in Afghanistan. You can fill in. You don't need the rest, you can fill in the rest. Truth cannot speak to power. And our systems break down. In the clan, it's about teamwork and collaboration. And the means is respect, empathy, connection with the other. The base here is moral. What is the common good? The highest common good. Participation in dialogue. Dialogue is very different than debate. There are team builders and facilitators. The climate's trust. The needs are inclusion and validation. And here the weakness is groupthink. We don't dare confront the person next to us after a while. We avoid the work of conflict. Finally, in the green quadrant, it's about adaptation and growth. The means is shared purpose. And then an absolutely elusive concept, self-organization. Been around for 20 years. I can talk about it for 3 hours in an executive classroom. People do this, and at the end, they have no idea what I'm talking about. It's absolutely elusive. It's about inspiration and hope, visionary innovators, incredibly creative, energizing place, meets my need for stimulation and growth, and the danger is confusion, chaos, breakdown. Now, we can take a group of executives, play a game with them for 10 minutes. They absolutely have it. Then for 10 more minutes, and they will immediately tell you the obvious right answer is we need them all. It's about balancing these things. And they'll state that to you. And they have virtually zero idea of how to do that in the real world. Because if you look at the outer circle, this is the same model now in management talk. On that outer circle, if you read it, those are the diseases of organizational culture. Everybody in this room can tell at least one story about one of these diseases. They are so common. If we put the positives in the middle, so for example, we say we need creative action. We fall victim to something Gregory Bateson's talked about for years now. It's called schismogenesis. Schismo means split, genesis, birth. Split at birth. Every person in this room, including me, when we engage in an intentional action, we are acting on a value. Usually it's not terribly clear what that value is, but we're acting on it. And what we don't see is the opposite positive value. In fact, we tend to denigrate it. We need to kill all this bureaucracy and become innovative in this company. So we have these tensions, and we are carrying our own disease. We're out trying to cure diseases while we're planting them in the system in every act we engage in. This picture, if you look at it, is very simple and incredibly complex. The average manager does not have that picture in their head. The Bateson phenomenon leads to a problem that the Greeks understood 3,000 years ago. Every Greek tragedy is about this picture. The hero chooses a value, begins to implement it, and has success, and then crosses a tipping point. And the success turns into failure. And the hero responds by escalating the commitment to a failing strategy. And it turns into catastrophe. And this happens in life constantly. What I'd like to do is lay on that model the work of a very interesting man from MIT, who's an action researcher in the Lewinian tradition from Michigan. And so he makes interventions, thinks deeply about them, writes them up, and builds this theory of practice, if you will. He has so many interesting statements. The success of the intervention is a function of the interior condition of the intervener. I said that to a clinical psychologist 3 nights ago. He said, "That's exactly right." My success with my clients is not based on the technique I use, it's the condition I'm in when I use it. Do I love them? He got that immediately. And then I said, okay, how do you get in that condition? And he got very confused. That was the hard part. This is Gandhi. Be the change you want to see in the world. It's elusive to us, that notion. Because I'm about changing you. I'm acting on you. It has nothing to do with me. He says the essence of leadership is to become aware of our blind spot, our schismogenesis. And then shift from ecosystem awareness to ecosystem awareness, from seeing the parts to seeing the whole, of which we are a part. I tell executives all the time, The boss is always part of the problem. You know that about your boss. You just don't know it about the person who leads your direct reports. Equal awareness concerns the well-being of all, including the self, and can lead to shockingly effective outcomes. That is not 2%, 3%. Dramatic transformational outcomes. And we see this in case after case after case. So, he argues, it turns out he uses the same 4 perspectives from the competing values model. And he argues, he uses it in a different way. It's a developmental way. And he says, look, here's level 1. When a disturbance comes, you and I tend to rely on what we already know. We're anchored in the past. We're path dependent. And we deny change. That is the natural thing to do. That's the mindless situation. Number 2, a disturbance happens and we go into the ego state. The mind opens. We engage in objective analysis. Now, if you look at the little picture there, the eye moves to the edge of the boundary. And it's now looking out at others and saying, here's your problem, sister. Here's your problem, brother. Here's what you need to do. Listen, son, you need to do your homework at night. We're going to stop arguing night after night. Just do it. I'm fixing you. I would suggest to you that's 80% of all the interventions in the human race. Me, the expert, telling you what to do. Me, the boss, telling you what to do. When we don't care, when it's indifferent, it's fine. It works because we'll just do it. Move this over here. Okay. When you say stop smoking, that's a whole different ballgame. The boss gets up and says, here's our new program. And we play the music, put up the posters, and everybody goes back to their desk and does what? Absolutely nothing. We'll wait and see, right? We would rather be in control than be effective. At least I'm in charge telling you what to do. The third level is very different. Emphatic, empathetic, relational. All of a sudden, if you look at that diagram, that dot has moved completely outside the boundary. I am in you. I feel what you feel. I know what you think, what your perspective is. I honor it. I value it. In fact, I'm helping you surface it. We're now tightly linked. We're bound. We're unified. Together. A lot of us can talk about empathy. We have very few experiences with it. So here the heart opens. Here we value each other's perspective. Hey, let's have diversity. Let's hire some people from that group in. And then let's treat them like we've always treated everybody. What have we got? We've got anger. We've made the organization worse. Can I treat this person as an equal? This woman, can I treat her as an equal? Can we co-create understanding? The moment I do, everything changes. The last, as always, hardest to understand. All of a sudden, that disruption, because I'm logically there, I'm emotionally there, you and I are connected and we've identified the highest common good, we have a space into which we can look at the future with an open will. A willingness to learn what's really going on right in front of us and bring that future into the present. That's a very different kind of learning, and it leads to emergent outcomes. That's the opposite of the hierarchy. The hierarchy, I'm kind of control everything because I have to. The most elusive part of this is this emergent notion. That can't be. Well, I want you to understand the path. The path looks like this. Here's the red quadrant. Let's think about this individually rather than organizationally. And I have a disruption, I deny it. It won't go away, I have to admit it, so I move to a very natural place. I go into logical analysis and problem solving. I'm in my technical stance. Now, please note the shape of the S. And look at the difference between the journey from red to blue and blue to yellow. That is, the movement from red to blue, looking over here, the red quadrant is a sister quadrant to the blue. It shares a common dimension, control. Moving there is quite natural. Look at the yellow and the blue. They're conceptual opposites, moving from logical analysis to a larger place where you matter. That's a big jump. That's hard to make. If I get there, it's very natural to move to a sister quadrant. Now, the way I try to think about this is in this picture. These are the assumptions of social science. Here's the first three assumptions of economics. Man or woman is a rational economic, a rational analytic, self-interested actor. Resources are what? Scarce. Conflict is inevitable. That's economics. Those are the first three assumptions. And there are many others from the social sciences. So there's conflict. We have transactional relationships around this financial world. We constantly monitor threat. The boss raises an eyebrow. I noticed that. That's dangerous. We're always monitoring threat. It's programmed into us. It's a part of survival. We know negative is stronger than positive. We filter the communication. We don't tell people the truth. 18 years in Afghanistan. Truth not speaking to power. Generals saying, hey, we're successful, knowing they're not because that's how they keep their job. Well, that's not about generals. It's about every organization on the planet. So we restrict engagement. The learning, if it happens, is incremental. Why do social scientists believe this crap? This is negative stuff. Because they study me and they study you. You and I carry this theory. You're driving here on the highway, someone cuts you off. You feel enraged. Why? They violated a contract. We live by exchange theory. It's right here, just below consciousness, operating all the time, governs our interactions, and does not, where it should go, produce high-quality connections. It produces secular space. And how we interact determines reality, creates culture. That's where culture comes from. This theory produces something that looks like this. HR can't talk to sales. Production can't talk to accounting. Full of conflicts in our organizations. So we lose communal focus, distrust and fear climb, all the interactions filtered, the problems keep increasing, so our solution is to intensify control. More control systems. Negative peer pressure, resistance arise, we get isolated silos, we burn money. The transactional costs are astronomical. When I put this slide up in a room full of executives, it is really unfair. Their heads go down. The pained look on their face. This is where they live all day long. It's a terrible reality that we're putting on that sheet. This slide has a big empty space. Did you notice it? I once said to a sociologist, I'm interested in positive deviance. He said, there is no such thing. By definition, there is no such thing. And he was right. In my day, if you took Sociology 101, it was called social organization. Why is it order in society? Middle of the curve. If you were glutton for punishment, you took 102. Social deviance, mafia, prostitution, etc. What was the title of 103? Trick question. There was no 103. There is no right side of the curve in sociology. And that's not about sociology, it's about the human brain. The reality you and I experience is up there. We don't see this. Constant clarification of highest purpose, shared vision, increasing trust and courage, authentic dialogue, spontaneous efforts, small wins, emotional contagion, that's positive emotions, positive peer pressure instead of negative peer pressure, resource multiplication. Again, we get enormous increases when this happens. The middle of the curve is real, the left side of the curve is real. What is the right side of the curve? The average reaction is that's utopia. That's not real. This is absolutely scientifically verified, not only in positive psych and positive organization scholarship, but in a very sophisticated field called complexity theory. These words are simplified versions of very technical terms that they have verified for 20 years now. And it's based on nonlinear mathematics. But when I teach those technical terms, again, the executives cannot process them. This is a very hard thing to see, but it's real. It happens. That's the missing part of reality. Now, why does this matter? Most of the time, we live in the red and the blue quadrants. And we orbit around theories of transaction and exchange. And we end up working on the left side of the curve. The jump to the right side of the curve is very big jump. That takes me to the economics of higher purpose. I left the university in 2006. I went away for 3 years and vowed to build an organization based on the principles of positive organization scholarship. What happened was the highlight of my life. I came back, and my good friend Anjan Thacker, who was a world-class economist, sat me down and said, "What happened in Australia?" A lot of people did that, and I'd say, "Well," and they said, "Want to hear about my new car?" Anjan just kept asking questions. For 2 hours, I described social excellence. He got up, he came back, and he said, "I've been thinking about it. What you just told me can't be true. By economic theory, what you just said is impossible. We have to write a paper." So we wrote a paper. Now, before we wrote that paper, he had to teach me economics. He said, "Here's microeconomics in the thumbnail." Microeconomics is about the principal-agent problem. The principal's the owner. The agent's the worker. I promise you 10 units of value, wealth. You give me 10 units of work. That's our contract. As long as you are there to watch the agent, the contract works perfectly. If at any moment you turn your back on the agent underperforms the contract. That's the principal-agent problem. Nobel Prizes have been won based on what he calls the workhorse of microeconomics. So we wrote the paper, we created this mathematical simulation, we created a conventional organization, and then we introduced one change. We introduced higher purpose. What happened to the model was pretty dramatic. When higher purpose has utility for all, a new social order emerges. The agents become principals. They become owners. They become intrinsically motivated. They work for something more than money. Commitment and effort increase, turnover goes down, profit increases, except, this is huge, except when higher purpose is a manipulation. If I teach the average CEO, here's the value of higher purpose, they'll say, "Okay, I'm going to go create a higher purpose. Let's spend a week on this." So we can trick them into working harder. Well, another tool. The problem is, it never works. what you do when you are inauthentic in the process is you put it up, and I go to the clerk at the cashier's table in the cafeteria, and I say, hey, what's that thing on the wall? And they roll their eyes. What you've done is positive harm to your organization. You've made the workforce even more cynical because they see your hypocrisy. In the blue model, it's about being smart. That's all that matters. You trick them because they're not smart. And the system falls apart. Because, anyway, so those were the findings. Anjan said, this is so exciting. Let's go do a qualitative study. Let's go interview CEOs of purpose-driven companies. Now, that's kind of backwards from the way we think in our field. We just do the quantitative and then the qualitative. But I thought, that's kind of an exciting idea, go to see these people, so we did it. Now, for me, the big surprise came. When we went and did that study, this is a little model that appeared last month in an article in the Academy Management Journal by Karen Golden Biddle, and it's a paper on organization change. She starts with a very simple model. Belief, surprise, doubt, inquiry, new belief, surprise. And then from that she builds an elegant paper about organizational change. What we discovered was very interesting. A large subset of the CEOs we talked to when they first became CEO did not believe in people, purpose, or culture. What they believed in was this. Now, this is while in the office of CEO. What happened next was a very special kind of surprise. It was crisis. They were facing a situation that could not be resolved by red and blue thinking. And the crisis was just getting worse. The crisis forced them to learn, to look and see things they've never looked at or seen before. And that led to the big jump and a big change. Now, what I'd like to do is to share a case with you that illustrates that process very clearly and helps you understand the claim. There's a company in Detroit, Michigan, called DTE Energy. It gives you your electric power. The CEO is Jerry Anderson. That reference up there is to a podcast episode. If you Google Jerry Anderson, HBR, Harvard Business Review, IdeaCast, you can listen to this interview. I highly recommend that each of you do, because Jerry does something CEOs can't do. He tells the truth. He says, here's what really happened. And you can feel it. You can feel the vulnerability and the authenticity. What do we learn from Jerry? Well, Jerry leaves the blue quadrant. Why? A crisis called 2008. You remember the Great Recession? Within weeks, he was millions of dollars in the red. Huge crisis. Brings together all the smart people. What can we do? Blue analytic logic. The only thing we can do in this high fixed cost company is downsize. Jerry says, I just went through the company and told everybody they were a person. If we downsize now, we lose them forever. Okay, smart guy, what do you want to do? I don't know. CEOs can't say, I don't know. Jerry was in a big problem. So, we got a herd of horses. Jerry goes to his herd of horses. And he says, let me share with you what's really going on. Let me tell you the truth. Here's the facts. Here's the analysis. I don't want to downsize. I'll do anything to avoid downsizing. Problem is, I don't know what to do. Whoa, what did he just say? But, now listen to this. I believe you do. I believe you know what to do, and I'm not even smart enough to ask the right question. Only you can do this. I need your discretionary energy. I need you to do what you know how to do. And he went back to his office and said, what in the world did I just do? In the first month, the finance guy comes. He says, okay, how are we doing? The finance guy says, hey, we're ahead of plan. He says, that can't be. The next month, had a plan. August comes, very cool August, bad news for a utility company. All right, what's the news? Had a plan. Anderson smashes the table and says, your model's broken. It doesn't work. You need to get it fixed. And the finance guy smashes the table and says, my model is perfect. It works. This is exactly what's happening. And Anderson says, at that moment, my life changed. The next 12 months were the most educational months of my life. This man's got a lot of degrees. Came to places like this. The next 12 months were the most educational months of my life. Why? All right, what's happening here? When he says to the herd of horses, here's where we are. Something just happened. Personal interest and collective interest just became one. Ruth Benedict was an anthropologist. She studied 6 indigenous tribes. She said 3 of them made my skin crawl. The other 3 I loved to be with. She spent a very long time trying to explaining the difference between those tribes. She invented a new word called synergy. That's where the word came from. When the collective interests and the individual interests are one, everything changes. A new system emerges, a synergistic system. So you have a bunch of people now stepping into that stance, and all of a sudden you've got a finance guy saying, we're ahead of plan, we're ahead of plan, we're ahead of plan. That can't be. General Motors just went bankrupt last week. The city of Detroit's falling into the Great Lakes. Michigan's falling apart. The whole country's falling apart. We can't be ahead of plan. 2009, best financial year in the history of the company. Cannot be. Impossible. So these surprising measures. What's going on? Something initially is going on that Jerry cannot see. It's called emergence. Afterwards, he learns about it, and he gives lots of examples when he tells the story. His favorite example is, we had this problem, $30 million problem. Before they sent that out for people to work on, they said, well, we need to see if we can fix it. They got it down to $27 million. Then he told them his story, asked for their discretionary energy. They said, we have to look at this all over again. Took it apart, redefined it, took creativity to it. $3 million. We just saved $27 million. He said, that's not one case. It was 100 cases like that. That's emergence. CEO is not telling him to do that. He's not smart enough to ask. The leadership's coming from below. Jerry's being exposed to something he can't imagine. He sees the measures, he has doubt. All of a sudden, at that critical moment, he's becoming aware of things that cannot be. All of a sudden, 12 months, most educational year of my life. What did that educational year look like? He's now talking to new people. He's trying new experiments. He goes to USAA, talks to CEO, has an epiphany. He's learning things because he's doing what? He's left the blue quadrant. He's discovering the yellow quadrant. He's discovering the green quadrant. And it is like a religious experience. Then it gets interesting. Jerry Anderson has now detected social excellence, and he's begun to learn from social excellence, something people never do. The researchers say we only learn from failure. We do not learn from success. And there are some people starting to question that a little bit in science. Learning from excellence? We don't even see it. How can we learn from it? Jerry sees it, starting to learn from it, and then this amazing thing happens. He asks the question, the unicorn question. I've never seen anybody write about this, talk about it, or even note it. I think it's really important. What's the unicorn question? Jerry Anderson, after the best year, 2009, at the beginning of 2010, brings his direct reports in, who have lived through this as well. And then he asks the unicorn question. If crisis can create social excellence without leadership, can leadership create social excellence without crisis? That's a question that's impossible to ask. A manager cannot ask that question. And because of the experience they had, they bought in. They said, let's do it. Now there's an aspiration that's totally outside the middle of the curve. Now look at the dynamic. Jerry makes a request. The herd responds to the request. Jerry's watching the herd. That is not about independent, dependent variables that work at the middle of the curve. In complexity theory, there are no independent, dependent variables. Everything influences everything else, back and forth. It's exactly what's happening to Jerry. Now, he wants to create it. Unthinkable. So what happens? Jerry's integrating the quadrants. He's integrating differentiation. In fact, Jerry says, when I talk to the engineers, I don't talk the way I'm talking to you. I have to talk their language. Jerry's bilingual. From 2010 to 2020, DTE outperforms the average in the industry by 300%. That's the multiplier effect. All right, bottom line. I want to have you join me in a minute for thinking about what are the implications of this for my children when I interact with them next time, the people who work with me, or the scientific questions I ask. I think there's a two-stage process. The first stage in the process is I have to become a unicorn. I have to change my interior condition. It's a moral issue. I have to become more virtuous in the way Kim Cameron writes about it. We wrote this book to help people do that. We said there's 4 transformational questions. What result do I want to create? Whenever you authentically answer that question, because most of the time we don't know, you immediately go intentional. You leave mindlessness. Question 2. Am I internally directed? We are trained to be externally directed, and we give away our locus of control. Do I have integrity around this purpose? Question 3, am I other focused? Do I know their deepest needs and interests? Question 4, am I externally open? Am I able to join them in co-creating? Now notice something. We went from the red to the blue as a first step, and then went backwards to the blue for integrity, which is a sister quadrant to the yellow. We're creating a different kind of journey. Step 1, I need to, Barbara Fredrickson teaches about the positivity ratio and getting up there. How do you get there? And when you're there, is it permanent? No. It looks like this. Finally, I think 4 things to keep in mind in interacting with horses. Number 1, I need to move them from skepticism to belief. We studied unicorn public school teachers, and one of them said to me, the root word of education is educe. Educe means to bring out of. Most people believe education is about putting things into people. She said, I don't see it that way. These little kids, I think they're mathematicians already. My job is to bring that mathematical capacity out of them. I need to bring the greatness out of them that already exists. What a strange notion. Kim and I have been teaching week-long classes on positive leadership for 20 years. There was a phenomenon for a number of years that troubled me. These executives would sit on the edge of their seats, loving Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. And then on Friday, I would say, what are you going to go home and do different? And they would look terrified. Because they know that if you become a positive deviant, first they laugh at you, then they argue with you, and then they try to kill you. They know that. Carl Weick once said the value of looking at an extreme case and seeing the richness in it is you can come back to the conventional cases and say, was it there also? I found that fascinating. And as I thought about this problem, I created an exercise that never ceases to amaze me. It's very simple. I want you to figure out the difference between a good conversation and a great one. Write it down. Good marriage, great one. Good team, great one. Good organization, great one. Then I spend an hour putting their answers on a board. Then I say, what is that? And they look at me like I'm crazy. Finally, we say, that is a theory of social excellence. Then I ask, whose theory is it? And again, it goes quiet. The answer is, oh, it's our theory. That's right, I didn't put up any PowerPoints. Then the big question, how's that possible? Where did this theory come from? Dead quiet. Finally, someone says, experience. Exactly right. There's one great conversation in 1,000, but you have 100,000 conversations. You experience social excellence from time to time. You see a show about a great marriage. You belong to a great team. You see a great organization. You go to Zingerman's. In the real world, we experience social excellence. That means embedded in your memory is social excellence. You're living by this theory. But in you, there's another theory way down here that doesn't get access, doesn't even get the dots connected. But the moment we do that exercise, and I say, you already believe in this, they're shocked. The resistance of the weak declines dramatically. We're bringing the greatness out of them that's already in them, that's in you. Number 2, the temptation is to tell them. That's what professors do. The challenge is to disturb their minds. We had a man come here to the Positive Business Conference from Texas. He was a CEO. Went back, he told his people, I want a positive organization. They looked at him like this. They didn't know what he was talking about. So he kept talking at them. Nothing happened. Then he did a brilliant thing. He bought airplane tickets, flew them to Ann Arbor, Michigan, took them to Zingerman's, and had them spend 2 days at Zingerman's. They came to my office. I expected this. I got this. When I get back to Texas, I'm going to do this. What did that man do to them? He exposed them to a reality their theory couldn't tolerate. If it's real, it's possible. The extreme case from Weick. An existence proof. Let them smell a unicorn. Let them touch it. It disturbs the theory they hold so dear. We have 30 years of research in transformational leadership. Been confirmed time and time again. There's 4 factors. The first 2 are called idealized influence and individualized consideration. Transformational leaders do red and blue quadrant work and more. Idealized influence is goodness. I want to be like you because you're so good. Individualized consideration means I know who you really are. My boss knows me, cares about me. We also have 30 years of research that says great leaders are high on task, blue, high on people, yellow. It's an and, not an or. Impossible to process up here. I need to move from objectivity to unity. We need to discover the common good. Talking to that teenager about not doing the homework. You can keep talking. Or you can discover the common good. That's a whole lot more work and a whole lot more effective. Number 4, turning knowing into learning. The other 2 factors, inspirational motivation. Connect someone to a future they can believe in, individually or collectively. And intellectual stimulation, lousy term. What it means is I question all your assumptions. I challenge you constantly to think for yourself. I set a model. I show you love. I connect you to a future and challenge you to think. And great things happen. That's a very large empirical base of evidence that that's based on. My final challenge is to understand collective intelligence, the collective mind, and to facilitate the conditions in which it can arise. Self-organizing processes. That's how you turn horses into a herd of unicorns. So where have we been? In closing, we've talked about turning the horses into unicorns. We've talked about a paradoxical shift that the world does not want you to make. You're trained not to do it. There's an economics. In our book, we do not say one negative word about economics. We think it's an incredibly powerful field. But it's blind to some very important possibilities. When a student comes to this cathedral to be educated for 2 years, we fill their brain with blue and red notions. And even in the behavior courses, without knowing it, we as professors fill their head with red and blue notions. Checklist mentalities. And finally, I believe you and I can refine the invitation to social excellence. In closing, I'm hoping that if you're a scholar, you've been challenged just a little bit to think about whatever you do in a slightly new way. If you're a practitioner of organizations or a parent or whatever it is you do, I'm hoping that you'll look at your spouse theory and your theory in action and think about it in a new way. I think that in this day, the future of this planet is dependent upon people like you and I doing that very thing. Thank you very much.
Before you clap, really quickly, I just want, because I know once you start clapping, it's going to be hard to get your attention. Before I thank Bob, I want to thank the CPO staff for all of their work in putting this event on. Thank you very much. I also want to remind you, this is a monthly event, so we invite you to come back next month. We have Lindy Greer. Lindy's a brand new faculty member in our group, and interestingly enough, her talk is on positive hierarchies. So there you go. So I hate to be the red person to focus on time, but we value you having here. And now let's please give Bob a warm welcome. We have a token of appreciation, an artifact, a positive spiral for him, which is very evident. So thank you, Bob. Thank you.
It's a great quiz.
And I think if you have questions, Bob will be here for a few minutes afterwards. So thank you again for coming.